Hello and welcome to Light Warrior Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Kan, author of the #1 best-selling book, Sensitivity is Your Superpower: How to Harness Your Gifts, Fulfill Your Purpose, and Create a Life of Joy. I'd love to see you in the light medicine community. It's actually free to join. We do mini healings every month. So just go to karenkan.com/community. And then if you are a highly sensitive person, a sensitive soul, I have the Sensitive Soul Empowerment Guide, the 3 ways of navigating your way to more peace, positivity, and personal power. Gotta like those P's. So you can go to sensitivesoulguide.com for your free download. And when you get that, you'll actually see the link right to the light medicine community. So you get a 2-for-1. So today, back is, well, I shouldn't say back because this is the first time on Light Warrior Radio. My friend Cory Endrulat, we had invited him to the Health Freedom Tribe to talk about his book, How to Return to Nature. And it was so awesome, this back and forth, and we just absolutely loved it. So I thought, oh my gosh, we have to get you on the radio show. And that was like 2 books ago or something. So we finally get a chance in the schedule for both of us to meet and talk about all sorts of things. And right before we hit record, we were just talking about, like, there's so much to talk about. So we're gonna kind of, go a little bit into, health, a little bit into freedom, a little bit into like what does our new world connected to nature look like? But before I do that, let me formally introduce. So Cory Edmund Endrulat is a fellow human and a messenger of nature. He's the host of End of Slavery Summit, featuring about 50 speakers and hundreds of resources. He's the main editor of the Liberator 2 newspaper, online and in person, for advocating a voluntary free world. Encapsulated the philosophy of natures and what he calls Naturosophy. There we go. Authored several books, including The Tao, The Full Return to Nature, The Arda Diet, Slavery Gone for Good, and Nature's Radical Honesty. He's a speaker, natural law teacher, integrative nutrition health coach, content creator and presenter, inventor, and modern abolitionist. Originally from Pennsylvania, the birthplace of American independence, he specializes on topics concerning health, education, freedom, morality, and action. All of his works connect to his mission and the message known as nature is the answer. So thank you, Cory, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I'm
Thank
super
you for
excited that you're
introducing
here.
me. Yes, we're on the cutting edge of a lot of these ideas. So I thank you for being on the cutting edge with me because you're sharing a lot of unique things. I mean, just that introduction, I'm like, oh boy, talking about nature and freedom, and then bringing back ancient philosophy, and then bring it to the modern day. And then you and I we were chatting about technology and even the potential use of AI. I mean, this is all rather new to humankind, and so looking at the effects of how that affects our nature and how we can move forward in a ever evolving, more artificial, materialistic, yang based world. How do we, negotiate our yin side? How do we negotiate our more natural, sensitive, spiritual side, which I think a lot of people are looking into for the reason that they feel overwhelmed at times, or they feel like, already that advertisements and material things are getting to them. And it's funny because, for thousands of years, people were talking about material things and attachments. But now we live in a world where it's like we have AI, where it's like becoming sentient technology. It's like, what? People are starting to,
Hmm.
to not know what is reality. And I think it's something that maybe some people can be fearful about, but it's something I've written a lot about. And I feel the need to usually write my books, I told you, out of the fact that they haven't been necessarily done, connecting dots that people not
Right.
don't usually see, fulfilling places that people haven't usually fulfilled. And so that's why my work is usually my moral obligation. And I want to bring my message to, my generation. I'm 23. I don't claim to know it all. As you and I talked about, I'm sort of an aggregator. I kind of bring information together, studies, people, and geniuses. I mean, and it's like you and then Jim Gale and others I've connected with. You guys have done so much more than me. I'm learning from you guys constantly. And so it's just so inspiring, and I hope for more of my generation and others to just see all that's out there, because it's like every day I'm still learning, even when I think, "Oh, wow, I figured something out." No, I'm still learning. And
Oh
so,
my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's really great is, for me, is that sometimes it's taken decades, right, to get
Mhm.
to this place. where I'm able to now see a bigger picture, not the whole picture, but a bigger picture. And I also like to connect the dots and bring
Right.
things together and bring different expertises together, not in the same way you bring people together, but their ideas and, to create my Topican healing method and all these kinds of things. And what's really great is being inspired by the young people like
Mm,
yourself who, I don't know, I've lost count. Is it 6 books now or seven? Um, that you published, and we feel like, oh, it's not too late for the world. Some of our young people are actually awake and are not just lulled into this virtual reality addictive whatever thing and losing themselves, not eating good food, bodies disintegrating, getting
mhm,
diabetes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, all that stuff earlier, decades earlier than when I
mhm.
first went into medicine.
That's
So that was
true.
really humbling to see that. And then seeing someone who's doing what you're doing is just like a bright light, like, oh, thank God. Yeah.
I
So thank you,
noticed
Corey.
that. I noticed that very early on when I was in high school, I was helping a lot of different people around my age with depression and anxiety because it's
Yeah.
very common and mental health is big. And so naturally I just got into it because I was just there for support. Again, I wasn't
Mhm.
claiming to be an expert, claiming, oh, I know how to solve people's problems. I was just there for support, like just being there for them because some of these kids didn't have a family structure, didn't have like basic things that I grew up with and I was fortunate to have, and maybe they had some things that I didn't. I wanted them to see their own value. I told you this as well, and I often mention this through a lot of my works, is that I want people to see their own value. And my generation, part of the depression and the anxiety is feeling like, well, oh, everyone's already done it. There's all these experts, all
Mm.
these scientists, all these doctors, all these content creators. They look better than me. I go on Instagram, they have a certain identity, they're prettier than me. It's like we judge ourselves, we have this identity crisis, and
Mm.
then we pressure ourselves, and then we look for others to try to help us. So we may get desperate and say, well, I need to get into a relationship ASAP, or oh, I don't need any person at all. It's like we have these extremes, the left brain extreme, the right brain extreme, masculine, feminine. And then you have like that social war, the cultural war, and then the politics that gets in the way, and then the economy. And then it's like, I can't afford anything. Oh, you go into college. It's like funny because adults will say, oh, you gotta stay young, enjoy your youth. But the next moment they're like, so where you going for college? Oh, where
I
are you going
know,
after that?
right?
It's like, do you realize you're kind of pressuring them to grow up, even though you don't want them to grow up and you want
Yeah.
them to enjoy their time? Is it like a never ending trauma loop that's just being continuing generation to generation, and they're kind of just projecting to their children, and the
Yep.
children are projecting to their
Yep.
children? And there's things that we have to be able to look at from a fundamental point of view. And I didn't expect to get into psychology, but naturally that's where things led for me when I was getting into health and nutrition. I was just reading ingredient labels when I was 13 and researching. It's like I realized a lot of it's going on in our mind. A lot of it is
Mhm.
realizing our own value. Because when we see our own value and we see why we want to heal, why we want to live, why we want to help others, then we can start to help ourselves much more and care about ourselves, and utilize those self-love routines, or even just affirmations and all these different methods. Journaling has helped me a ton, and these things could be powerful for self-reflection and then seeing where people should go in their lives. And again, that's like personal experience, something I've done. It's just journaling, that I know is super helpful. But
Mhm.
again, it's like, "Oh, I don't know how to write. I don't know how to dance." It's like, and we judge ourselves, and I saw this all throughout high school. And it's like, at first I was very shy. I didn't dance or anything like that. But then a couple years later, I was like the one saying, "Hey, just
Like, good for
express
you.
yourself." Yeah, like just start dancing. And being shy is okay, being observant of the world around you. And now I'm trying to bring that message of what I've seen and how I observed to the world. I'm still a rather quiet person, even though I do content creation and all that stuff and may seem like I'm kind of out there. I like to take in, I like to be very present. And so
Mhm.
this is, I would say, part of the self-reflection practice and seeing your own value is you don't need to try to be someone that you're not. You don't have to try to be out there or try to do anything like that, but rather just tone into yourself and utilize that self-reflection and then realize your own value. Because everybody has it. Like I would talk to people who would just feel like there's nothing good in their life and everything's bad. And all it takes is to show them that there's somebody probably in a worse scenario to realize, wait, they're not actually as bad as they think. But not just that, I don't have to compare them to someone else. I can help them see that there's always a silver lining. Every cloud has a silver lining, that as the saying goes. And so every time something happens, it's like, wait, this is actually a learning experience that other people don't get to learn from. That can make you a stronger person. Just as
Yeah.
like your immune system gets in contact with some, foreign bacteria, and then your immune system gets stronger having experienced that and having recognized that. It's the same, pretty much the same concept. As long as you support yourself and keep a good head on your shoulders, you can become soon invincible in a sense. Like nothing will let you down. Not to say that there aren't things that are going to let you down. There's always going to be things that push us down, and everybody experiences it. But see, recognizing that helps you realize that you don't need to push yourself down.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. I think that I think one of the books, I can't remember, Ryan. Yeah, he quotes Marcus Aurelius as the obstacle
Hmm.
is the way. I don't know if that's Stoicism or
Stoicism is big.
yeah, yeah. It's so helpful these days
It's
to
it's on the
realize.
rise.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just to say, oh, we need trauma or we need these, really, really difficult circumstances to make us
Mhm.
stronger, but some of us actually agreed to come to the earth at this time, to grow, to see, okay, here's a challenge.
Yes.
Can my soul, even though I don't remember who I was, prior to incarnation, can my soul remember who I am, in this iteration of me? And it's so very interesting.
Well, isn't that interesting? Like trauma's kind of built into the universe, in a sense, and it's not to say that that makes the universe bad by necessity. It's to say that, like as you mentioned, it's a learning experience. So when you fall on the bike, learning how to bike, once in a while, it's your step toward mastering the bike.
Yep,
Or when you burn
exactly.
yourself when you're trying to learn how to cook, I mean, you're just on the path of learning how to cook. You're gonna make mistakes. It's gonna happen. I mean, just think about the birth process, how
Mhm.
traumatic that is kind of just for the mother or the baby, but yet that's like one of the most essential processes on earth,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
so I think that's pretty eye-opening. It's like, wait, trauma is actually something that in a way is necessary through that point of view, but it's not to say that you want it. It's to say that it's something that you shouldn't fear, right? Shouldn't be in a state
Right.
of fear and feel like, yeah, this is not something that I don't want in my life at all. And just try to stay away and try to hide away from
Avoid.
the problems.
Yeah.
But actually more so like being able to live with the fact and flow. And I think that's where Taoism and Stoicism, they really have a tie. Is being able to recognize like you're gonna have problems, but as long as your mind is in control, it's your own predicament. That's what they often say. It's like you can
Hmm.
choose the direction you take. Things can come to you in your environment, problems can happen to
Yes,
your body, but you can take control of your mind and you can help your body and you can help decide the path you want to
absolutely.
take.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we perceive whatever is happening as something that serves us, then the body will respond in kind physiologically to that perception, which is, some epigenetics by Dr. Bruce Lipton. The whole
Oh,
epigenetics is,
yes.
yeah, it's not genetic determinism where, well, you have these, crazy genes, so too bad for you. You're gonna get diabetes or heart disease. Nope, that's actually not how it works. So,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it's
Joe
really neat.
Dispenza. And then there's
Yeah,
like Mark
Joe. Yep,
Passio.
absolutely.
Mark Passio is how I got involved with a lot of this community when it comes to the
Mm,
psychological, spiritual type of
yeah.
understanding of a deeper level, of understanding something called the principle of mentalism in Hermetic philosophy, which is the idea that all is mind and everything was kind of created in the mind. So, in order for a chair or a table to exist, it had to be conceived in someone's mind first as a
Mm,
possible object. Oh, this was possible because we opened up our imagination. And so we're able to image, see magic,
mm,
magic,
right.
create things based on
I
what we,
magic. Yeah.
yeah, imagine the magic. Yeah, it's absolutely magic. I mean, when we look at technology, would we not call that pretty kind of close to magic? What we're able to create nowadays, some of it is fascinating. I would say, love is magic too. And a lot of these really core natural things that we have a hard time explaining throughout history is quite magical. But technology too is quite magical because it's like, wow, look at all this. Like we built this? What? You know, it's
Mm.
just it's fascinating.
It is, it is. Well, and then, I was just, watching a movie with friends the other day called, I think it was Old World Order, and it was just talking about
Mm,
giants and, the different cathedrals and all the harmonics and the pipe organs being potentially healing instruments that are being
yes,
taken down.
I
And
heard about that.
yeah, it's just really, really fascinating, that, we're learning about, wait, 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 wait. I've just taken this for granted, and now I have this new fact that isn't a new fact. It's like there was free energy before. Oh, well, then the next question is, well, what happened to it, right? So tell us a little bit more about your perception of freedom. What's that mean?
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, I would say, because when I talk to your health freedom tribe, I mean, it's just amazing because they were so open-minded, right? And coming from that perspective of like, I'm willing to learn and I'm open-minded and I'm willing to ask questions is so important for learning. And I have a lot of ideas to share that certainly. Some people may at first be averted to be like, what? No, that's not possible, or that that can't be. And then maybe some of your viewers or yourself may resonate with that. Like you've probably run into some people who just thought, "Oh, that's not possible. That should be dismissed." But then you find out, wow, it's pretty possible. Even in yourself, you might have doubts about certain things, as you mentioned. Like, wait, is that really true? And
Yeah,
so,
why are the door handles 20 feet up? You
yeah,
can't reach them.
so freedom is a very interesting topic, right? Because obviously people start to get very political.
Yeah.
But you know that I don't approach this from a political perspective. I approach this from a psychological, philosophical point of view, and that's where I see freedom is. It can't come through any other means, and I say this because one of the perfect examples I use, and this is my latest book that I published, "Slavery Gone for Good." Black Book edition. This was a rendition, and I wanted to really prove the case. It's
Mm.
440 pages in detail. I wanted to put it all on the table that the abolitionists were one of a kind. I would say the true freedom fighters, quote unquote, in this world. Not our founding fathers in America, but actually the abolitionists who came many years after, like not even 100 years actually. And they saw the problems of what the founding fathers did. And they saw that, some of them had slaves. That wasn't really the issue, though. They saw the foundations to the systems that they were creating. And they saw the mindset in the people and they started looking at it from a spiritual point of view. A lot of the abolitionists were very spiritual people. That's where you had the rise of deism and Christianity, people challenging the church, people challenging the state, people challenging ways of eating, even just
Hmm.
building houses. The octagonal house movement was growing in the 1800s, and that was like a big
Wow.
trend in the
Really?
United States. And that was done by a doctor who did a form of medical practice, which I don't know if people still do, called phrenology, I think, where they study
Oh,
the head and the skull and certain parts
yeah.
and to determine people's health. And this was a guy, I think his name was Dr. Fowler, and he has a lot of different expertise on different things, but he believed the octagonal house model was, superior for cost and all sorts of things. And so it became a big trend. But anyways, they were challenging everything. I mean, just think about the abolitionists. If you
Mm.
probably learned a little bit in school about them, they had the Underground Railroad. So they were building towns away from the government. I mean, what could be more freedom oriented? I mean, they were directly challenging the laws. They knew what they were doing was illegal, but they were helping slaves run away for freedom. So these guys were truly standing on principle. And people like Henry David Thoreau, the transcendentalists, who were also quite spiritual, they were willing to go to jail for their beliefs. Like they were just so passionate to the point where they knew that what had to be done, right? Like that it's just inevitable. After thousands of years of slavery, everybody would prompt up to them and say, "Well, how could we end this practice? We've had it for so long. It helps the economy. Who will pick the
Yep.
cotton?" Right? And so all these superstitions and fears got in people's mindset of saying, "Well, slavery is wrong, but we need to keep it because we've had it for so long and
Wow,
everybody's
doesn't it
had
sound
it."
familiar, people?
So, we see these types of different psychological patterns happening now where people are fearfully attached to old ways of thinking,
Yes.
perhaps. And I've nailed it down to mental slavery. If you look at people like Bob
Mm.
Marley, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, a lot of change makers in history, they talk about mental slavery as being the root cause to all forms. And so I address what that is. What does that really mean? And one of the best psychological resources I refer people to is the Stanley Milgram experiment. And you can look up, video footage about this. It's also been redone hundreds of times. I actually made a whole documentary focused on this.
Oh,
And
really?
I show
Okay.
all the different video footages and I bring them
Wow.
all together. And then I show how it's not human nature to want to worship somebody as an idol figure and see that they are special and exempt from morality and can do wrong behavior because they're an authority figure. And so that right there is what the Stanley Milgram experiment proved. It proved the idea like most people are willing to be obedient and do whatever harm to their fellow man just because an authority figure told them to. And they believe in that concept of authority so strongly that it just takes over their world perception. And partly a great reason why is because people were not educated, one, about history, and two, about the nature of slavery, and three, um, just about how their mind is manipulated at a young age. The fact that when they're really young, they're brought up in a schooling system that may not teach them virtue or morality as obedience, but obedience as morality,
Obedience.
obedience as
Yeah.
virtue, and stay in line, just do what you're told is not the same thing as what's actually right here, what's
Yeah.
actually good to do. And the best example of this was World War II. If there's anything we're going to look at from the near history and just see obvious examples of this, how come millions of people were willing to follow the orders of a few? So if we're talking about freedom, wouldn't we look at these historical events that happen, not just theories, not just ideas of like, oh, this is what's potential in our republic, and our founding fathers wrote this down some 300 years ago. I don't even know who they are, and all these ideas. I want to look based on what actually happened, and then look at the psychology of people, which we can observe any day and any time,
True.
worldwide. And not limited to just borders or certain cultures, but being able to look at the minds of people and evolve the human destiny, because
Mm.
freedom to me, I see as our destiny. And we've been searching for it and trying to have it for thousands of years. And we just keep believing that that freedom needs to be determined by certain structures and forms that we put
Right.
over that freedom because we fear the chaos that's within freedom. And so we
Yep.
justify creating an artificial, sort of man made law based system of order to try to control that freedom only to the certain extent that we believe will protect our freedoms,
Yeah,
protect
it's like
our
we don't
rights.
trust ourselves to
Yes.
self-govern, yet the average person is from, for lack of a better, description, a good person, meaning that they're moral, they're ethical, they don't want, I mean, yes, there's a few that want to hurt people. It's like that, they do it for fun, but the grand majority of people that I've met want to do well and want to do,
Yep.
good things. So, the structure, you introduced, when we had the Health Freedom Tribe, you introduced the terms statism and
Yes.
voluntarism. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But that was a real opening for me, because I never heard of those terms. And
Yes.
the whole, anarchy, I just thought was violence, and
Hmm.
that is not the definition of anarchy. And even my mom, I think I told you this. My mom said, "Oh, well, she sent me some video, which was probably like, meant to scare people, like literally planted. This
Hmm.
is what freedom looks like." And it was like all these people like crashing things into stores and stealing stuff.
Mm.
I'm like, everybody that I know would never do that, but
Yes.
they're like programming that. Like, this is what freedom's going to be like in our TV shows, our movies. If you have freedom, this chaos is going to happen, like Walking Dead, like, all this kind of stuff. And I'm
Sure.
like, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, when you ask what freedom is, the best I think example is seeing what is slavery, the opposite condition. Because when you understand the nature of it, which is what my book goes into, you can understand what then freedom is. And this is core because you actually can't have freedom or a voluntary world, as I describe it, without rules, such as the fact that you should have voluntary interactions among your fellow man, or the fact that you own yourself. Those are rules. The fact that you recognize you self own, like you own yourself and no one else owns you. The fact that you recognize that it's wrong to harm another person, to do violence to them, these are rules. So to assume that all those rules would just go out the window the minute we take out some person with a suit and tie and certain titles and identity positions and certain scribbles on a piece of paper, it seems kind of absurd to me because it
Mm.
seems to me, as you mentioned, if I talk to anybody, pretty much 99% of the population, and I've done interviews on the streets with people too, random people, they all know what's right and what's wrong because they don't want to receive harm back to them. It's called the golden rule for a reason. They don't want to go around hurting people because they know it's not going to generally yield the best results. They're not going to purposely, when they're driving in the streets, try to crash into another car. you know, it's this is not the type of behavior people do because they care about their own health and safety. And this is the funny thing. So it's like when you realize, oh wait, so people are not just doing it because people are telling them to, they're doing it because they actually want to do it in
Yeah.
many ways, then
Yeah.
you realize it's okay. It's not so, black and white in what people claim it is. And this idea that people throw on it, utopian. Is it really utopian? When, again, all the same charges were thrown on the abolitionist for wanting to end slavery. So when you realize it's the exact same parallel, and it's
Mm.
just us overcoming this massive resistance to our natural condition, which is freedom, then you realize, we're just kind of putting a lot of burdens and barriers and attachments on ourselves that are unnecessary, holding ourselves back from our potential. And when you see people who are, grazing animals, who are living off the land, and they're happy and they're cheerful, ask them about their views on government and politics. Do you think they even care half the time? No. For a reason. They're living their life. They're having fun, and I think this is telling
Mm.
because we get so wrapped into that world and we start looking at it like a game, left versus right, red versus blue. I'm with this tribe, I'm with this idea, and I need to now use this idea. Now it's okay, there's always going to be different groups and cults, as we might call them. But there's always going to be different groups of people who believe in certain things. The problem is in politics is they impose it on each other. One
Yeah.
side wins, they have to use violence now to impose against the other side.
Their will.
All
Yeah.
laws backed on it. And look at someone like Leo Tolstoy. He's known as one of the greatest writers of all time. And he's somebody who said this in his own words, probably the closest work to mine. It's called Slavery of Our Times. And he says, quote for quote, all law, all legislation is slavery. And that would shock, like, I'm surprised historians don't pick this up. I mean, they talk about all his other works like War and Peace and all these like fiction works and poetry and all this stuff he's done. But what about this work where he's like trying to educate and bring this to humanity, saying, look at this obvious evil that's in
Wow.
front of our face. And it's so direct. It's not like it's indirect. I mean, he's telling you straight up like what people need to do to create freedom, like stop participating in the system. And it was just so, bold for its time because
Huh.
now it's like it's still bold
He would have
now.
been censored.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, our founding fathers, a lot of them were. I mean, if you think about it, sorry to tell you, but every revolution has kind of been pretty bloody. So we look at a lot of people look at our founding fathers as like heroes, but they were killing cops in the streets. The cops were the British, who were oppressing them. Now, I'm not saying that's what people should do. I'm saying that people look up to them as heroes. So it's just interesting to me that people will look up to individuals who are doing violence to others as heroes simply because of the cause that they're doing. And
Mm.
they were disobedient. They were disobedient to such a high extreme that most people would not want to be disobedient to that extreme. And there are people, surely, definitely in these communities who will say, yeah, we need to use violence to go against the state. But Leo Tolstoy was strictly, nonviolent. The abolitionists, very strictly nonviolent. They actually had a newspaper called the Non-Resistant. And it's
Wow.
actually there's the Wikipedia page even says it's one of the earliest forms of anarchism. And this is
Wow.
so why would a non-violence peace group be anarchist? You
Right.
see what I'm saying? And if you look, it's like, oh, but I thought anarchy means chaos. It's like, and then you start looking at people like Murray Rothbard, people like there's a whole bunch of them, Ludwig von Mises, and looking at free market capitalism, people like Ayn Rand in the 1900s, and they start saying that without government, things can operate on its own spontaneously through the market because if there's a demand, there'll be a supply. So if people want roads, if people want certain things, there's going to be demand, there's going to be supply, and the market determines what gets created. You don't have this
Mm.
artificial like hands pulling resources to different places,
Wow.
controlling over what should happen. And so they invented terms for this, like laissez-faire, which means just let things be. And
Yeah,
that
I
goes
know
back to
that.
Taoism. In Taoism, it's like the idea of wu wei, or spontaneous, effort, like effortless effort,
I
is
love
the idea
this.
of learning how to let go and let
Yeah.
things manifest on its own. And if you
Yes.
look at Taoism, again, this is mainstream. Go to the Wikipedia page. Taoism is one of the first philosophies that's considered anarchist. But what is Taoism? A bunch of sages talking about how being the master of yourself, talking about, being able to recognize that you don't want to be controlled by a lot of these external factors. I mean, these are rules. Like the Tao Te Ching is a rule book telling you how to live your life. And so when we say there's no rules, it's quite funny because there's laws that govern reality constantly, such as if you jump off a cliff, you're gonna get hurt. Some people might consider karma as a natural law of cause and effect. And then I mentioned the Hermetic principles. These are laws, these are rules. We have to live by them. So there clearly are rules present. But if we don't understand those rules, and if we don't understand we own ourselves, and we don't understand what's right and wrong, then we're actually going to be enslaved. And then we're
Mhm.
actually going to have chaos. The mainstream has been able to convince people that freedom is chaos and slavery
Yeah,
is
that's
order,
right. That's
and
what my
that a
mom did,
different
right?
or and then a lesser form of slavery is not slavery, and therefore acceptable and permissible and therefore allowed. So and to continue and to grow until it becomes very obvious that slavery, and then people end it, but then they create a new form of slavery because that's all they ever knew. They were unable to escape
Mm.
the mental paradigm of what you call statism, which is true. Statism is mental slavery. It's just another word for it. It's the belief in authority, the belief that, you're meant to be a slave, that you're not supposed to be free,
We can't really think for
essentially.
ourselves because heaven
Yes.
forbid.
And voluntarism is that alternative, and there's different ways to say that as well. But it's just that idea of saying you are free and you can live your life voluntarily among other people as you mostly do in your life. Most people, 95% of their life is voluntary. That 5% is politics. And that 5% is super dangerous because any wrongdoing that you allow is going to grow. So we wonder why governments keep growing and they don't stay limited in form. It's because we're allowing the violence that the
Right.
government is using to continue. And that continues their violence, and that continues the power that they gain from that violence. And then it continues the strife, it continues the division, it continues all the different problems in society. And so when I shifted from health to freedom, it was only natural because I want to look at healing the world, not just an individual mind. And that's where
Mm.
everything shifted for me. It's like I realized statism, as you mentioned, most people never heard of it. And so
Right.
it's like my goal, my moral, obligation to bring that to people's attention, especially the medical community, because I think they should study this mindset. Look at the Stanley Milgram experiment and see how puzzled the scientists were. They're like, we can't figure this out. Why are people believing this? But people like Larkin Rose in his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is going detailed into why exactly that is. And these same doctors and scientists never heard of him or observed these ideas. So I'm trying to bridge these connections, and that's why a lot of doctors recently, I mean, now they've realized how important freedom is after their practice has been attacked. And over the recent years, what happened with COVID, if they can't say certain things, if they don't administer certain medicines, even just for licensing, oh, natural medicine's not patented. So there's already a bunch of hands of government within their practice. So they should know firsthand how bad it is. But just see the fundamentals to that system. Is it even needed at all? Or could we move past it to a much better system that actually embraces natural medicine or the things that work, because the market and what works will actually be the real government of this world?
Right. And even perhaps the so-called few that are profiting off the many,
Hmm.
it's like, well, there's something in it for them too, you know? Like
Yeah.
it's not just like I know there's some thoughts of we should get rid of those people. But I'm like, that kind of still smacks of violence such and such, where they got rid of the government before them and then the government before them and the government before them.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't see how this is going to work. And I realize you're not going to necessarily, train someone from the get-go to be like from a demon to an angel, so to speak,
Right.
right? But there must be something where you answer the question for all, what's in it for me?
Yes.
And even if the so-called, the controllers or whatever saw what was in it for them to, have a different way. Now, it could be just like I can stay alive with these people in charge, right? It could be that, but hopefully, something better than that. Like, wow, this feels really good to, create or help co-create this society. Like, I really feel good about myself. Like, I don't know what, like, because I'm not in their heads. But there must be a way where it's a win-win-win for everyone, and the earth
Yes.
is the third win.
Well, yeah. If somebody has a good product or a small business is trying to flourish, I mean, what better than to create an environment that allows, that free competition to show like, hey, this is what the product is, rather than having companies like Amazon and Google, which are tax exempt, that don't have to pay taxes and are basically working with the government to have a monopoly over these smaller businesses. Is that really fair? Does that mean that we really truly do have a free market? No. There's certain medicines that can't come overseas into America because the
Right.
FDA doesn't allow it. Stuff
Right.
that could be potentially super healing. And the FDA, it's like we don't elect those people. These people, it's like who are these
Yeah, that's
people?
right. When did
It's
I
like
select you?
it's like we might care about this one president, but like you realize there's a whole bunch of these people, and they're all funded on on taxation, which is backed by violence. Because if you don't pay taxes, you're going to be coerced against your will. So is this really a system we want to deal with? Like to me, this is
Mhm.
barbaric. Just start doing some research on simple things regarding slavery, like how did slavery begin? How does slavery continue? How does someone become a slave? Well, it's war, capture, jailing systems. I wonder who does that.
Wow.
It's every government in history. And so when you're
Wow.
replacing a government based on war, based on violence, using war, what do you
Mm.
expect the result condition to be? Another government on top of that. And that's why, these abolitionists, again, came from a very peaceful perspective. They knew everybody was going to call them radical and attack them and say that they were violent, even though they weren't violent. So they
Mhm.
wanted to put up the most peaceful cause possible. Same thing Mahatma Gandhi did, Martin Luther King, because it's very effective to approach things from a civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance point of view. And I've done video series on like these ideas, talking about how nonviolent resistance is the most powerful strategy to use. Even the Quakers used it throughout history to protest certain laws, and they'll be like, "Yeah, we're just not going to pay it. We'll go to jail." Like, I don't know how many people nowadays would just be like, "Yeah, we'll go to jail together, all of us together." But like back then, that was a common thing to do. If you just didn't like something, you can just be like,
Wow.
"Yeah,
Wait, we're
yeah."
we're too cushy here right now, Corey. We're really cushy in our homes and cushy in our, luxury vehicles and stuff. We don't want to go to jail,
But we
right?
have the mass technology revolution, which is what really helped the abolitionists succeed. Because for many years, people were saying slavery was wrong, but they didn't have the ability to mass print educational material to the
Ah,
world and share it. And there were philosophers who had great messages that only now we're seeing their message, and it's
ah.
being able to be spread because we have technology. So in the
Mhm.
1800s, they had the printing press. That was like a new technology for them. And so that was a big deal. You start seeing censorship, you start seeing all these things that you see now, but you start also seeing the expanse of information. And that's why there was censorship, because it's like, oh, you can't share that material. That's too powerful for people. That used to be in our families forever. Like before, the priests were the only ones who had access to the Bible. Everyone can't have a Bible of their own. You have to make sure you go through the priest. You have to make sure you go through the church. You're not allowed to practice your own spirituality. You have to be Catholic. You need to do things our way in our system. You were raised this way. And so over time, people were like, no, we're not going to do that. And then Protestants, came in, and now you have a whole bunch of denominations of different churches because they're all like, yeah, we have our own Bibles. We can be our own interpreters. We don't agree with this. We don't agree with this. We don't agree with that. It's like, well, it's because it's freedom. It's literally moving in the direction of freedom. Everything from
Mm.
health to religion to everything is moving in that direction. You see it right now, like you talk about, light medicine and spirituality, how much of the East is coming to the West. That
Mhm.
type of migration would not be so easy if the world was so disconnected with technology, without technology, without the ability to share information like that and translate different materials. So this really makes it powerful. Like we can create a shift overnight if we wanted to with this
Right. I often
information.
say that. It's like I don't have proof of that, but it's just this sense, this inner knowing, that that is absolutely possible, which is why I keep, doing what I do. One question I want to ask you, Corey, is
Sure.
like, and this is my perception only, guys. So it's just my biased or whatever perception is that so in America, the small businesses need to jump through a lot of hoops. So
Hmm.
there's this tax form, there's that tax form. Like I just got asked by my accountant, who's a very amazing woman. She's always on time, dots the I's, crosses the T's, which probably means that I'm, you know, have a lot more tax to pay than the other person. But, you know, she's so good. And she's like, oh, I need a 1099 from this lawyer guy. Like he's not exempt, he's a lawyer. And I'm like, really? Do I have to? Like, and then there's this new thing that came out, which you may not be familiar with, called the Beneficiary Ownership Information, BOI. So when you go
Hmm.
to the BOI website, it says all businesses of certain types have to fill this form out to inform the government of what your activities are or whatever, right? And so now these other companies are like, oh, we'll help you fill it out, you can just pay us $199 or whatever, right? So I'm like, what form? Why do we have to fill this form out? Right, so I go to the site, beneficiary owner information. At the top it says fraud. Like it literally is like the fraud police, and I'm like, seriously, you're gonna have little old people, like little companies. I'm looking at the flow chart, who has to fill it out? Do the big corporations have to fill it out? Nope. But this is like a money laundering prevention process. And if the little people, the little LLCs and the sole proprietors, whatever, if maybe not sole proprietors, don't quote me on that, but if the LLCs, I know for that, sure, don't fill it out on time, then it is $500 a day of penalty if you don't fill out this form. And I'm
Ouch.
like, where did I agree to that? Like, do I see a contract? I don't see a contract. Like, I'm just questioning this thing, right? And then, but there's all this pressure, like the accountant and the agency, that helps with the
Hmm.
LLC. They're like, well, you got to fill out this form. I'm like,
Yeah.
why? Well, because you got to fill it out. Yeah, but it doesn't make any sense. And then in New York State, Corey, when we're talking about this encroachment on small business in New York State, and I know we get a bad rap. Um, so I have like 2 employees and like 5 contractors from like Canada, Georgia, like different places, right? Michigan. So the one insurance company that will cover workman's comp
Hmm.
says that according to their policy, if my contractors don't have their own workman's comp, they're going to charge me for it. But I'm like, but they're in Canada, Georgia, and Michigan. So if I can't file a claim, then why do I have to pay a premium for them? I don't get that part, right? Nobody can answer that question.
Yeah.
It makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, other insurance companies don't do that, but this is the only insurance company you are allowed to have because you have so many contractors versus employees. So you have no choice. You have to go with this insurance company. I was like, wow. Okay. I definitely can feel some resistance coming up, right? Like breathe it in,
Yeah.
stillness, right? I was like, okay, I'm so done with this. I'm so done with all this paperwork stuff. It's like,
Yeah, and I feel like so many people can like sympathize with that some way. It's like, oh my gosh, all this stuff I have to like fill out and do. It's like and I'm doing the same thing, with my land project. It's like I have to decide a certain
permit
legal
this and
structure and
yep,
I have to
yep.
make sure all the permitting. It's like, what is all this stuff? It's like, can't
Yep.
you just have land? Like, can't you just like give money? Like, what's so hard about this? Why do we have to have all this other stuff?
Exactly. It's like dissuading people from going their own way. Just follow the course, follow the programming, follow the
Yeah,
thing,
and then
and
we
you'll
make
be
all these
just
justifications.
fine.
And we make all these fears justifications like, well, if we don't do this, if we don't do that, if we don't do
Right.
this, then it's like at the end of the day, then you end up with like hundreds of different things, and one
Yep.
of them is to prevent this thing, and then another
Yep.
thing is to
Yep.
prevent that thing. Just like a drug, right? It's like
Yeah,
we'll give this man-made
exactly.
drug, and then this one will prevent that drug, and then this drug will prevent that drug,
Prevents
and
the
then
side effects of
eventually,
this drug,
yeah.
possibly.
It's like, okay, but we're still not getting to the root cause. And
Right.
that's what we should try to do, I would say, as practitioners, looking at the world at large, is like, okay, we want freedom. We realize if somebody has a disease and it's taking over their body, they're not free. How do we, take over control of our own health? How do we take control of our own bodily independence and freedom? Well, isn't that interesting? When you work with the laws and the rules of the body, you
Mhm.
now can attain freedom. So the same thing when you work with the rules of natural law or karma or cause and effect, and you recognize chaos keeps happening and the cycles of government keep rising and falling. They keep ending up in democide, which is the number one cause of unnatural death. I often say that for a lot of people because they
What
still
is
don't
it? What
know
did you just say?
democide, the number one cause of unnatural death.
Democide?
Yes, it's known as death by government. So World War II,
Oh,
the amount of deaths that took place, it's like way more than heart attack, way more than any other leading cause of death.
wow.
So when people say freedom is chaos, well, here you literally have governments
Wow.
causing
I never
chaos.
heard of that term because yeah, because we're told that the number three, the top three causes are heart disease, cancer, and prescription medications.
Yeah. Yeah, look up Professor Rummel, and he coined this term democide, and there's others as well. And there's other books that gather statistics around, just different centuries. And he just took certain centuries, and it was already over the charts, for the amount of deaths that took place of people just shutting off their conscience, doing what they're told, and believing
Wow.
in this authority figure. So, what my work is to do is to help people recognize never suppress your conscience, always do what
Right.
is right. And
Yes, thank you.
yeah, and that's the goal of the Stanley Milgram experiment. The people who did not obey the authority figures said, I learned from history that, people who suppress their conscience, they're the ones that do the most evil. The good people that believe that they're doing good, but because they're following the orders of someone else, that's what's causing all the evil in the world. So it's good people allowing evil. And that dichotomy is what's crazy because so many people are trusting of others. Like a good
They're
thing,
very
like
trusting.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
trusting, like, "Oh, look at this politician. He looks like me. He sounds so sweet. He
Right. They
sounds
can't
polite."
possibly be doing that. There's no
Yeah,
way,
and then you
right?
wonder how
There's
they
no
get
way the
corrupted because
government would do that. They're
and
taking
even
care of us. As I quote my mother, I'm so grateful for the government because we have this and we have this and
yes.
we have this.
Yeah,
Put
our
your mask on,
plantation's
honey.
better
You know?
than that plantation. It's like our this plantation whips their slaves a little less than that one. It's like doesn't make it better. You know what I mean? It's still a plantation, and this is the point I'm getting at. It's like there's different forms of this structure that we made over time. We recognize monarchy as bad. Kings and queens, they don't have the right to rule after thousands of years. And then our founding fathers were like, well, let's create a different system for the people by the people. But it was a piece of paper that, like the Constitution, that people didn't consent to. They didn't personally write and say, I want this constitution where it says you have the right to take my money through taxation. That's what it says in the Constitution. And the Declaration of Independence is literally just a piece of paper that says we're free. Like that's if you want me to summarize it in two words, it's just we're free. We're gonna take it ourselves. So that makes sense, right? That's just something like anybody could have like. I can write that now, and it's like, yeah, I'm free. It's a fact. But our actions, so it's not the identities. It's not these imaginary things. It's about our actions. And what is the action that government always does? It's violence. It can't there hasn't been a government without violence. Now, you can call it a voluntary government to have one that's not based on violence, and you can maybe use terms like that. Like there was an abolitionist that I studied, Charles Lane, and that was what he called it, a voluntary government. But you know what? And he was an abolitionist. All his abolitionist colleagues were like, "What is that government?" Because they're like, at a certain point, it's voluntary. We've never seen that in history,
Right.
and it's just people going about their lives every day with each other. And so because they lived in the Underground Railroad, some of these towns that were broken away from the system, they already lived and experienced freedom away from the
Wow.
government. Yeah, so some of these slaves and that escaped and the abolitionists to help them escape, since they were already breaking the law, they were willing to throw out all the laws with it as well because they're like, this
Oh,
system is based on slavery, it perpetrates slavery, so why should we support the system at all? This is what people like William Lloyd Garrison, who's known as like the leading abolitionist, he's known as a radical for wanting to end slavery, but he's just like caring about people's freedoms and caring about humankind. So it's just like wild to think like, the media would attack him and blame him for all sorts of things. He's like the most peaceful guy on earth, trying to
well, we
promote the
see a
most
lot of
basic
media attacks
cause.
on, and people will believe whatever the media says
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
and then and so again, perception. You control the minds, you control the actions. And if you control the actions, you control the destiny of the world. Right. So that's why the mental work is so important. If you fix mental slavery, you get to the root cause, statism. Any practitioners who are listening right now, I mean, this would be like right now, the thing to hone in on. What is statism? What is mental slavery? And then, me bringing it to my generation, it's important too, because some people might be in a toxic relationship where they feel like they don't have boundaries or they haven't made those boundaries clear. and they don't have principles for how to live in their relationship, right? That's a big problem affecting America. We have like a divorce rate over 50% almost. It's like wild. And people are having all sorts of problems with that. But when you understand the nature of slavery and the nature of freedom, you realize I can be in control of my own life and I can understand what my boundaries are. I don't need to be addicted to a certain drug. I don't need to, fall into this victimhood, trauma, abuse cycle. I can get out of this. It's like we're stuck in this barbaric way of using violence to control other people to create order. That's what government is.
Mm,
And we believe that we need it. Like we need this little bit of violence because we think it's necessary. And then it grows and it's like, how do we
right.
control it? And then it's like we
Yes.
put in a good politician. Oh, he sounds like us. He's good. But then
We'll
he gets
get rid of the
corrupted.
bad people with violence, but then there's going to be no more violence.
Yeah, but then he gets corrupted and you wonder why. It's because the same belief
Yep.
system is
Yep.
still going on and you put this person on a pedestal. You're giving them more rights than everybody else. And then you wonder why you're losing your own rights
Yep.
because you just gave yours away. Everybody's
Yeah.
equal. So if that means, we're all equal, then why are you putting this person on a pedestal with the ability to write down something on a piece of paper and all of a sudden dictate the lives of millions of people? And of course, no politician's going to go up on stage and say, "Let's do it with violence." Like they're going to say all the good things. They're not going to
Right.
tell you how they actually
They're
do
going to
it.
save people, save
Yeah,
grandma.
yeah, we're gonna make everything the utopian paradise. Carl Jung talks about this in his last book, The Undiscovered Self. For anybody also from the psychology background, he talks about how every government turns into oligarchy or autocracy, and how they function like a religion, and it functions
Hmm.
also like a mother or father-like figure. So the
Yes.
Republican will want the more protector, like I'm just want to protect my rights, and the mother-like figure is like I want to be the caregiver. I want to give you all these benefits and help provide for you. And so you can see these archetypes being projected onto others. But
Wow.
like again, this projection is what's so dangerous because you don't want to project your fears and your problems and your insecurities on others, telling them how to live their own lives when they
Right.
don't want that in their life. You know what I mean? It's
No.
peaceful people who aren't doing any wrong being coerced against their will. So when we say, well, what about somebody coming to my house stealing something? Well, the government is taking your stuff routinely, repeatedly, and everybody's okay with it.
Right.
So the difference between that and a thief, where they just take your stuff and they go away, and everyone sees them as wrong, is one is allowed to grow, and the other, it's like everyone will try to prevent, and everyone will try to like say this is wrong. We got to do everything in our power to get rid of it. And
Good
now we have
point.
security cameras and all these different methods, thanks to
Right.
the free market and thanks to competition, that allows us to see we can help solve all our problems without the
Oh my
government.
gosh.
On top of that, what's the whole point of the Second Amendment, as we say, and having our own firearms, if not for recognizing that we have to protect our own rights or be more in control of ourselves. Now, whatever your thoughts are on guns, I can probably sympathize with anybody's views on guns because I'm not a violent person and I want to do things very peacefully. But I'm just saying that the reason why people have that position is because now they have a method that doesn't rely on other people to protect themselves. They have
Mm,
a method to say, this, I'm in control, I'm free, and the other people are not going to tell me how to live my own life. As long
wow.
as I'm not the one coercing other people. You know what I
Wow.
mean? Because it wouldn't be
There's
reciprocal.
there's so much inner work, that
Yes.
is being done and needs to be done for us to
Yes.
really
We call it the one
own
great
that
work.
freedom. And Corey, we're running out of time here, but boy, we could just keep talking. It's been so great. Want to make sure people can connect with you. So can you share with us where we can get your books? We have Slavery Gone for Good, so the latest one since our last time we
Yes.
chatted.
Very important.
Tao, the full return to nature, and then where else can they follow you?
Yes, the slavery one is very hard hitting, but it does get to the root cause and it shares the history and improves the fact that the governments have always been slavery since its foundation, since Sumeria, or as far as back as we can find, because you can't have an organized system of violence without, claiming ownership over all those people. And I have quotes from abolitionists, so everything I said is backed by their own words, not mine. And my Tao book is very good for anyone coming from the spiritual perspective who needs maybe a lighter way of looking at the world, and seeing that hidden or yin part to our perhaps overly materialistic yang based society. It does tie into our freedoms because, again, attachments and desires and egos and identities do drag on ourselves and our value, and then we start judging ourselves, and then we don't see that inherent freedom that we have. So these do tie in, and as I mentioned, they're all integral. So you can find my work. Theliberator.us is my main website, theliberator.us. And I also have nita.one, nita.one, and that's nature is the answer. It's one of like my main messages I go by. So if anybody looks up Corey, nature is the answer, you'll find my work on most platforms. I try to be on all the
Good for
platforms.
you.
But that's always
You're
been,
prolific.
my guiding principle generally is to care and respect for the world that we're given, and try to recognize, natural medicine, natural health, and
Mm,
natural law, natural living. How can we integrate nature within everything we do to work best with it? So if people say it's human nature for us to obey authority and be slaves to governments, well, I'm looking at nature. I'm looking at the Stanley Milgram experiment. I'm looking at statism. I'm looking at the nature of our minds. I'm looking at the nature of how people go about their everyday lives. And so, I would challenge them. If you think I'm doing that, come with me with your information. I'm open. I want to learn from you too. I encourage the discussion. I usually read all my comments. I'm willing to help anybody out
wow.
there if you're doing any
Awesome.
content creation. So be sure to let me know. Anybody out there.
Yeah. Oh gosh, thank you so much, Corey. I look forward to having you back on Health Freedom Tribe. And for folks interested in checking out Corey's work, we'll put all the links below this video, this podcast. So thank you again,
Thank you so
Corey.
much.
It's been wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
thanks everyone for listening in. Until next time, lots of love.